now wore white, and hauled and fetched alongside the other guy's shine back in the mountains called Kinslayer's Dagger, with a ruby the size of a small hen's egg nestled between her breasts. The wetlands held rich prizes. A large emerald on her finger caught sunlight in green fire. Finger rings were one wetlander custom worth adopting, no matter the stares often aimed at hers. She would have more if they matched this one for magnificence. Most of the men thought Merrick or Benduin would be first to receive the wise one's permission to try Roydian. Only Effalin in that group suspected that none would, and she only suspected. She also was astute enough to voice her suspicions circumspectly to Savannah, and not at all to anyone else. Their minds could not encompass the possibility
Benny,
of shedding the old.
bro?
And in
Hope
truth,
you've been
if
doing
Savannah
well,
was
brother.
impatient to don the new, she was also aware that she must bring them to it slowly. Much had changed already in the old ways since the Shido crossed the Dragon Well into the wetlands. Still wet, compared to
Not
the
much. Same old, same
Yet more
old.
would change.
And you?
Once Randall
How you
Thor was
been
in her
doing?
hands, once she had wed the Karakarn, the chief of chiefs of all the Aiel, this nonsense of the dragon reborn was wetlander foolishness. There would be a new way of naming clan chiefs and sept chiefs as well.
About to do a dab.
Perhaps even the heads of the warrior societies. Brandal Thor would name them, pointing where she told him, of course. And that would be only the
Do a
beginning.
dab of this
The
one.
wetlander notion
Then
of
we'll
handing
do a
down
dab
rank
of
to your children and their children, for instance.
this one.
The wind swept higher for a moment, blowing south. It would cover the sound of the wetlanders' horses and wagons. She lifted her shawl again, then suppressed a grimace. At all costs, she must not appear nervous. A glance to the right stilled worry as soon as begun.
Yes,
Over
it was a
200
first,
Shido
so
wise ones clustered there,
after
and normally at least some would
paying
be
my
watching
part
like
of the rent,
vultures, but their
making
eyes were all on the rise.
a payment on
More
my
than one adjusted her
PlayStation,
shawl uneasily, or
I had a
smoothed
little
bulky
bit to
skirts.
spend, so I thought
Savannah's
I'd get
lip
some,
curled. Sweat beaded on some of those
excuse me,
faces.
a little bit of wax.
Where was their honor that they showed nerves before every gaze? Everyone stiffened slightly as a young, sober guy appeared above them, lowering his veil as he scrambled down.
Hey, Soy,
He
how
came
you
straight
doing?
to her, as was proper, but to her irritation he raised his voice enough for all to hear. One of their forward scouts escaped. He was wounded, but still on his horse. The society leaders began to move before he finished speaking. That would never do. They would lead in the actual fighting. Savannah had never more than held a spear in her life, but she would not let them forget for a moment who she was.
How
Throw
you
every
been doing,
last spear
Soy?
against them, she ordered loudly, before they can ready themselves. They rounded on her as one. Every spear? Benduin demanded incredulously. You mean except for the screams? Glowering, Merrick spoke right on top of him. If we keep moving forward, we can be... Savannah cut them back. Every spear. These are Aes Sedai we dance with. We must overwhelm them immediately.
Hell yeah,
Effalin
Soy.
and most of the others schooled their faces to stillness, but Benduin and Merrick frowned, ready to argue. Fools. They faced a few dozen Aes Sedai,
Hell
a
yeah,
few
Benny.
hundred Wetlander soldiers, yet with the more than 40,000 Algai Desiswai
Alright, well,
they had
I'm about to do
they still
dab with
wanted
some
their
Fruity
screens
Pebbles
with
now.
scouts and their spears in reserve as if they faced other Aiel or a Wetlander army.
Well,
I
it hasn't
speak
been
as
going
the
too
clan
bad, I
chief of the
guess.
Shido.
So
I should not have to say that, but a reminder could do
I
no
can't
harm.
complain.
They are a handful. She weighted every word with contempt now. They can be run down if the spears move quickly. You were ready to avenge Desane this sunrise. Do I smell fear now? Fear of a few Wetlanders? Has honor gone from the Shido? They turned their faces to stone as intended. Even Effalin showed eyes like polished gray gems as she veiled. Her fingers moved in maiden hand talk, and as the society leaders sprinted up the rise, the maidens around Savannah followed. That was not what she had intended, but at least the spears were moving. Even from the bottom of the fold, she could see what had seemed bare ground disgorging cut-and-sore clad figures, all hurrying south in long strides that could run down horses. There was no time to waste. She would have to have words with Effalin strongest of the Shido wise ones who could wield the one power. They were 6 or 7 for every Aes Sedai round Randall 4. Yet Savannah saw doubt. They tried to hide it behind stony faces, but it was there, in shifting eyes, in tongues wetting lips. Many traditions fell today, traditions old and strong as law. Wise ones did not take part in battle. Wise ones kept far from Aes Sedai. They knew the ancient tales, that the Aiel had been sent to the Threefold Land for failing the Aes Sedai, that they would be destroyed if ever they failed. They had heard the stories that Randall Thor had claimed before all, that as part of their service to the Aes Sedai, the Aiel had sworn to do no violence. Once Savannah had been sure those stories
Hey,
were lies,
Cronus, how you
but of
doing,
late
bro?
she believed the wise ones knew them for truth.
Hell yeah,
None
much
had
love
told
to
her
you
so.
too, bro.
It did not matter. She herself had never
Hope you're
made
having
the
a
2
good
journeys
weekend.
to Roidian required to become a wise one.
I
But
caught
the
a little
others
bit
had
of your
accepted
stream
her,
earlier.
however reluctant some had been. Now they had no choice but to go on accepting. Useless traditions would be carved into new.
Sorry I didn't stay longer. I
Aes
got
Sedai,
sidetracked
she said
on
softly. They leaned
cause I
toward her
barely
and
got
wielded
in
clatter
today.
of bracelets and
The
necklaces
new
to catch her low
UFC
words. They
5.
hold Randall Thor, the Kara Karn.
So
We must take him from
I got
them.
that in from
There were scattered frowns.
Gamefly, so
Most believed she
getting
wanted
down
the
on
Kara
that.
Karn taken alive in order to avenge the death of Kuladin, her second husband. They understood that, but they would not have come here for it. Aes Sedai,
Oh shit,
she
Benny,
hissed
hell yeah.
angrily. We kept our pledge, but they broke theirs. We violated nothing, but they have
Hell
violated
yeah.
everything. You know how Dessain was murdered. And of course they did. The eyes watching her were suddenly sharper.
Me and my
Killing a wise one ranked with
brother,
killing a pregnant
most
woman,
hated
a
girl,
child, or a
are
blacksmith.
gonna do
Some of those eyes were very sharp.
a infused
Charava's,
ham
Riala's,
for
others. If
Thanksgiving.
we allow these women to walk away from that, then we are less than animals. We will have no honor. I hold my honor. On that, she gathered her skirts with dignity and climbed the slope, head high, not looking back. She was certain the others would follow. Terava and Norlia and Dylan would see to that, and Riala and Tion and Mera and
Give
the
me 1
rest would
second,
accompany
everyone.
her a few days past to see Randall Thor beaten and put back into his wooden chest by the Aes Sedai. Her reminder had been for those 13 even more than the others, and they dared not fail her. The truth of how Dessain had died tied them to her. Wise ones with their skirts looped over their arms to free their legs could not keep up with the Algai, Desiswai, and Kadinsor, however hard they ran, though race they did. 5 miles across those low, rolling hills, not a long run, and they topped a crest to see the dance of spears already begun, after a fashion. Thousands of Algai Desiswai made a huge pool of veiled gray and brown, surging around a circle of wetlander wagons, which itself surrounded one of the small clumps of trees that dotted this region. Savannah drew an angry breath. The Aes Sedai had even had time to bring all of their horses inside. The spears encircled the wagons, pressed in on them, showered arrows toward them, but those at the front seemed to push against an invisible wall. At first, the arrows that arched highest passed over this wall, but then they too began striking something unseen and bouncing back. A low murmur rose among the wise ones. You see what the Aes Sedai do? Savannah demanded, as though she also could see the one power being woven. She was a sneer. The Aes
It would be
Sedai were
good to see
fools
the
with their
dosage
vaulted
too on
free
some of the
oaths.
edibles.
When they finally
Just
decided they
'cause,
must use the power as a weapon instead of just
most
to make
hated,
barriers, it would
When
be
he makes
too
the edibles, they're pretty
provided the wise ones did
they're
not
pretty
stand
potent.
too long staring. Somewhere in those wagons was Randall Thor, perhaps still doubled into a chest like a bolt of silk, waiting for her to pick him up. If the Aes Sedai could hold him, then she could, with the wise ones, and a promise. Terava, take your half to the west now. Be ready to strike when I do. For Dessain and the Toe the Aes Sedai owe us. We will make them meet Toe as no one ever has before. It was a foolish boast to speak of making someone meet an obligation they had not acknowledged, yet in the angry mutters from the other women, Savannah heard other furious promises to make the Aes Sedai meet Toe. Only those who had killed Dessain on Savannah's orders stood silent. Terava's narrow lips tightened slightly, but finally she said, "It will be as you say, Savannah." At an easy lope, Savannah led her half of the Wise Ones to the east side of the battle, if it could be called that yet. She had wanted to remain on a rise where she could have a good view. That was how a clan chief or battle leader directed the dance of spears. But in this one thing she found no support, even from Terava and the others who shared the secret of Desane's death. The Wise Ones made a sharp contrast with the Algai Siswai as she lined them up in their white Algoda blouses and dark wool skirts and shawls, their glittering bracelets and necklaces,
I've heard
and
how
their
you usually do it. Just
hair
because
held back by dark folded
when I was
scarves.
rolling a couple of them
For
up,
all their decision that if
this
they
was
were
the
to be
last
in the
little
dance
bit
of
that
the
was left
spears,
in
they
the
would be
tray.
in it, not on a rise of
So
thought. She did not believe they
instead
yet
of throwing it
realized
in
that
the
the true
container, I
battle
figured I
today
might
was
as well
theirs
just
to fight.
roll it up, see what
After today,
how it
nothing would be
goes.
the same again, and tethering Randall Thor was the smallest part. Among the Algai Siswai staring toward the wagon,
Yeah, there's
only height quickly told men
a
from
lab we
animals.
could send our stuff
Veils and
into and
chufa
get
hid
it
heads and
tested. It's
faces, and
I
Cutting
can't
Sword
remember
was
how
Cutting
much they
Sword,
charge.
aside from the differences of cut that marked clan and
Excuse me.
sect
You got to
and
mail it
society.
into them.
Those at the outer edge of the encirclement
Like what we
appeared
grow.
confused, grumbling
We
among
can send some of
themselves as
that
they
in
waited
and
for something to happen.
they'll test it for
They had come
us.
prepared to
Let
dance
us
with
know
Aes
like
Sedai lightning,
sativa.
and now they
Let us
milled
know like the
impatiently,
percentage.
too far back even to use the horn bows still in leather cases on their backs. They would not have to wait much longer if Savannah had her way. Hands on hips, she addressed the other Wise Ones. "Those to the south of me will disrupt what the Aes Sedai are doing. Those to the north will attack. Forward the spears." With the command, she turned to watch the destruction of the Aes Sedai, who thought they had only steel to face. Nothing happened. In front of her, the mass of Algai Siswai seethed uselessly, and the loudest sound was the occasional drumming of spears on
Yeah, all I'm doing
bucklers.
right now is
Savannah gathered
smoking
her
that
anger,
and doing the wax
winding
right
it
now.
like thread from the spinning. She had been so sure they were ready after Desane's butchered corpse was displayed to them. But if they still found attacking Aes Sedai unthinkable, she would chivvy them to it if she had to shame them all till they demanded to put on Gaishine white. Suddenly a ball of pure flame the size of a man's head arched toward the wagons, sizzling and hissing. Then another. Dozens. The knot in her middle loosened. More fireballs came from the west, from Terava and the rest. Smoke began to rise from burning wagons, first gray wisps, then thickening black pillars. The murmurs of the Algai Siswai changed quickly, and if those directly in front of her moved little, there was a sudden sense of pressing forward. Shouts drifted from the wagons, men yelling in anger.
Hey, Smoked Out, how you doing,
Whatever
bro?
barriers the Aes Sedai had made were down. It had begun, and there could be only one ending. Randall Thor would be
Shit, hell
hers.
yeah.
He would
Hope
give her
you've
the
been doing
ideal to
good,
take all of the
Smoked
wetlands,
Out.
and before he died, he would give her daughters and sons to lead the Aiel after her. She might enjoy that. He was quite pretty, really, strong and young. She did not expect the Aes Sedai to go down easily, and they did not. Fireballs fell among the spears, turning cut-in-sword-clad figures to torches.
Okay, I didn't know you could get
and
home
lightning
test
struck
kits.
from a clear sky,
Hell yeah,
hurling men
Smoked
and
Out,
earth
that's
into
good.
the air. The Wise Ones learned from what they saw, though, or perhaps they already knew and had hesitated before. Most channeled so seldom, especially where anyone besides Wise Ones could see, that only another Wise One knew whether any given woman could. Whatever the reason, no sooner did lightning begin to
Hell
fall
yeah,
among the
Smoked Out.
shadowed
Definitely
spears
appreciate
than
it, bro.
more struck toward the wagons. Not all reached its target. Balls of fire
Oh,
streaking
they
through the
ain't gonna
air,
be cheap
some
getting them, I
large as
know
horses
that.
now. Silver lightning stabbing toward the ground like
But
spears from the
I
heavens,
figure if you're
sometimes
able to
suddenly
get
darted
it,
aside, as if
it
striking
could go
an
around
invisible
locally
shield, or erupted violently
and
in midair, or simply vanished
have
altogether.
a way to test
Roars
people
and
that
crashes
people can
filled
have
the
locally
air,
tested,
warring with shouts
have
and
the stuff
screams.
tested, and
Savannah
you can just
stared
charge
at the
them
sky in
a
delight.
small fee.
It was like the illuminator's
Charge them
displays
cheaper than
she
what
had
they'd
read
have
about.
to pay
Suddenly the world
sending
shone bright
it out.
in her eyes. She seemed to be floating. When she could see again, she was flat on the ground a dozen paces from where she had stood, aching in every muscle, struggling for breath and covered with a scattering of dirt. Her hair wanted to lift away from her. Other wise ones were down as well, around a
Definitely
ragged hole a
glad
span across
to know
toward
that
the
you're
ground.
doing all right, Smoked Out.
Thin
I've been
tendrils of
worried.
smoke
Hadn't
rose
seen you
from
in a
the
minute.
tresses of sun. Not everyone had fallen. The battle of fire and lightning continued in the sky. Too many. She had to throw them back into the dance. Forcing herself to breathe, she scrambled to her feet, not bothering to brush off the dirt. "Push spears!" she shouted. Seizing Estalane's angular shoulders, she started to drag the woman to her feet, then realized from her staring blue eyes that she was dead and let her fall. She pulled a dazed Delilah erect instead, then seized up a spear from a fallen Thunderwalker and waved it high. "Forward the spears!" Some of the wise ones seemed to take her literally, plunging into the mass of Algai. Others kept their heads better, helping those who could rise, and the storm of fire and lightning continued as she raged up and down the line of wise ones, waving her spear and shouting, "Push spears! Forward the spears!" She felt like laughing. She did laugh. With dirt all over her and the battle raging, she had never been so exhilarated before in her life. Almost she wished she had chosen to become a maiden of the spear. Almost. No Far Darai Smai could ever be clan chief, any more than a man could be a wise one. A maiden's route to power was to give up the spear and become a wise one. As wife of a clan chief, she had been wielding power at an age when a maiden was barely trusted to carry a spear, or a wise one's apprentice to fetch water. And
That was
now
probably
she had it all. Wise one and clan
ones
chief,
that's on the
though
low
it
end.
would take some doing
They
yet
probably
to
go
have
up a
that
lot
last
more
title
too.
in truth. Titles mattered little so long as she had the power, but why should she not have both? A sudden scream made her turn, and she gaped at the sight of a shaggy gray wolf ripping Docera's throat out. Without thought, she plunged her spear into its side. Even as it twisted to snap at the spear haft, another waist-tall wolf bounded past her to hurl itself onto the back of one of the Algai Siswai. Then another wolf, and more, tearing into cut-in-sore-clad figures wherever she looked. Superstitious fear lanced through her as she pulled her spear free. The Aes Sedai had called wolves to fight for them. She could not take her gaze from the wolf she'd killed. The Aes Sedai had... No. It could change nothing. She would not let it.
Yeah, it
Finally,
definitely
she
end up
managed
paying
to pull
for
her eyes
itself.
away. But before she could
But the
shout
thing is,
encouragement
actually
to the wise ones
having the
again,
money to be
something
able
else
to
stilled her tongue and made
drop
her
the
scared.
money for one.
A knot of Wetlander horsemen in red helmets and breastplates, laying about them with swords, thrusting with long lances in the middle of the Algai Siswai. Where had they come from? She did not realize she had spoken aloud until Riala answered her. "I tried to tell you, Savannah, but you would not listen." The flame-haired woman eyed her bloody spear distastefully. Wise ones were not supposed to carry spears. She ostentatiously laid the weapon in the crook of her elbow, the way she had seen chiefs do, as Riala went on. "Wetlanders have attacked from the south. Wetlanders and Siswai Aman." She imbued the word with all the scorn proper for those who would name themselves Spears of the Dragon. Maidens as well. And there are wise ones. "Fighting?" Savannah said incredulously, before realizing how it sounded. If she could toss out decayed custom, surely those sun-blinded fools to the south who still called themselves Aiel could as well. She had not expected it, though. No doubt Sorillia had brought them. That old woman reminded Savannah of a landslide plunging down a mountain, carrying all before it. "We must attack them at once. They will not have Randall Thor, or ruin our vengeance for Dessain," she added when Riala's eyes widened. "They are wise ones," the other woman said in a flat tone, and Savannah understood bitterly. Joining the dance of spears was bad enough, but wise one attacking wise one was more than even Riala would countenance. She had agreed that Dessain must die.
I don't
How
know.
else could the other wise ones, not to mention the Algai Siswai, be brought to attack Aes Sedai, which they must do to put Randall Thor in their hands, and with him all the Aiel. Yet that was done in secret, surrounded by
You
like-minded.
never can tell.
This would be before everyone. Fools and cowards, all of them. Then fight those enemies you can bring yourself to fight, Riala. She bit off every word with as much scorn as she could, but Riala merely nodded, adjusted her shawl with another glance at the spear on Savannah's arm, and returned to her place in the line. Perhaps there was a way to make the other wise ones move first. Better to attack by surprise, but better anything than that they should snatch Rand al'Thor from her very hands. What she would not give for a woman
ready
who
to
could
cut all
channel
this
and
off.
would do as she was told without balking. What she would not give to be on a rise where she could see how the battle went. Keeping her spear ready and a wary eye out for wolves, those she could see were either killing men and women in Cut-in-Sor or were dead themselves, she returned to shouting encouragement. To the south, more fire and lightning fell among the Shaido than before, but it made no difference that she could tell. That battle with its explosions of flame and earth and people
Right,
continued
Benny?
unabated. "Push spears!" she shouted, waving hers. "Push spears!" Among the churning Algaida Siswai, she could not make out any of the fools who had tied a bit of red cloth around their temples and named
That's why I
themselves
try to just stay out of all that drama.
Perhaps they were too few to alter the course of events. The knots of Wetlanders certainly seemed few and far between. Even as she watched, one was swarmed under, men and horses, by stabbing spears. "Push spears! Push spears!"
Eventually.
Exultation filled her
I am
voice.
in my room.
If the Aes Sedai called
Bed's
10,000
like right there.
wolves, if Sorilia had brought 1,000 wise ones and 100,000 spears, the Shaido would still emerge victorious today. The Shaido and herself. Savannah of the Jumai Shaido would be a name remembered forever.
A little bit more smoke
Suddenly,
in
a
it.
hollow boom sounded
I'll
amid
probably
the
be
roar of
headed
battle.
that way.
It seemed to come from the direction of the Aes Sedai wagons, but nothing told her whether they had caused it or the wise ones. She disliked things she did not understand, yet she was not about to ask Riala or the others and flaunt her ignorance.
I'm not
And
shutting
her
down.
lack of the ability
Not
all
yet.
here had, save her. It counted for nothing among themselves. But another thing she did not like was for others to have power she did
But
not.
it's pretty much a roach
A flicker
already.
of light among the Algaida Siswai, a sense of something turning, caught the corner of her eye, but when she turned to look, there was nothing. Again, the same thing happened. A flash of light seen on the edge of vision, and again, when she looked, there was nothing to see. Too many things she did not understand. Shouting encouragement, she eyed the line of Shaido wise ones. Some appeared bedraggled, headscarves gone and long hair hanging loose, skirts and blouses covered with dirt or even singed. At least a dozen lay stretched out in a row, groaning, and 7 more were still, shawls laid over their faces. It was those on their feet that interested her. Riala and Alaris with her rare black hair all awry.
Benny.
Somarin, who had taken to wearing her blouse unlaced to show even more generous cleavage than Savannah herself, and Mera, with her long face yet more grim than usual. Stout Tion and skinny Belinda, and Modara, as tall as most men. One of them should have told her if they did something new. The secret of Dessain bound them to her. Even for a wise one, revelation of that would lead to a lifetime of pain, and worse, shame. Trying to meet To, if the one revealed was not simply driven naked into the wilderness to let her die as she could, likely to be killed like a beast by any who found her. Even so, Savannah was sure they took as much delight as the rest in concealing things from her, the things that wise ones learned during their apprenticeships and in the journeys to Rhuidean. Something would have to be done about that, but later. She would not display weakness by asking what they did now. Turning back to the battle, she found the balance changing, and in her favor it appeared. To the south, fireballs and lightning bolts plummeted as heavily as ever, but not in front of her, and it seemed not to the west or north either. What struck toward the wagons still failed to reach the ground more often than not, yet there was a definite slackening of the Aes Sedai's efforts. They had been forced onto the defensive. She was winning. Even as the thought flushed through her like pure heat, the Aes Sedai went silent. Only to the south did fire and lightning still fall among the Algaida Siswai. She opened her mouth to shout victory, and another realization silenced her. Fire and lightning stormed down toward the wagons, stormed down and crashed against some unseen obstruction. Smoke from burning wagons was beginning to outline the shape of a dome as it streamed up and finally billowed from a hole in the top of the invisible enclosure.
No,
Savannah whirled to confront the line of wise ones, her face such that several flinched back from her, and maybe from the spear in her hand. She knew she looked ready to use it. She was ready. "Why have you let them do this?" she raged. "Why? You were to obstruct whatever they did, not allow them to make more walls." Tian looked ready to empty her stomach, but she planted her fists on broad hips and faced Savannah directly. "It was not the Aes Sedai." "Not the Aes Sedai?" Savannah spat. "Then who? The other wise ones? I told you we must attack them."
Hell yeah.
"It was not women," Rihanna said, her voice faltering. "It was not." Face pale, she swallowed. Savannah turned slowly to stare at the dome,
Nice.
only then remembering to breathe again. Something had risen from
Now,
the
this
hole
one's
where
not
the
too
smoke
bad.
gushed out. One of the Islander banners.
Because the other one
The
I
smoke
got is
was not
Fruity
enough to obscure
Pebbles.
it completely.
And this one's
With a disc
Gorilla
half
Milk.
white and half black, the colors divided by a sinuous line, just like the piece of cloth the Siswai Amon wore. Randall Thor's banner. Could he possibly be strong enough to have broken free, overwhelmed all the Aes Sedai, and raised the The storm still battered the dome. Someone had emerged behind her. The other men were thinking of retreat. Not her. She'd always known that the easiest path to power lay through conquering men who already possessed it.
It doesn't have too much of a fruity
she had been born with the weapons
taste
to conquer
to it.
them.
Watch. Let me
So
try it.
clan chief of the Shido, fell to her at 16, and when he
this
died,
one's the Fruity
he chose
Pebbles.
out those most likely to succeed. Muradin and Kuladin each believed he alone had captured her interest, and when Muradin failed to return from Roidian, as so many men did, one smile convinced Kuladin that he'd overwhelmed her. But the power of a clan chief paled beside that of Dakara Khan, and even that was nothing beside what she saw before her. She shivered as if she had just seen the most beautiful man imaginable in the sweat tent. When Randall Thor was hers, she would conquer the whole world. "Press harder," she commanded. "Harder! We will humble these Aes Sedai for Dessain." And she would have Randall Thor. Abruptly, there was a roar at the end of the battle, men shouting.
Yeah, that's pretty tasty.
She cursed that she could not see what was happening. Again, she shouted for the wise ones to press harder. But if anything, it
pretty
seemed
smooth
the fall
as long
of
as you
flame and lightning against
heat
the
it up
dome
at the right
lessened.
temp.
And then there was something she could see. Close to the wagons, Kadinsor-clad figures and earth erupted into the air with a thunderous crash. Not in one piece, but in a long line. Again, the ground exploded, and again,
in all the different ways that you make it,
time a little farther from the encircled
really
wagons.
comes
Not a
out
line,
depending on how
a
you.
solid
the
ring
process
of
of it,
exploding ground
you could
and
say.
men and maidens that she had no doubt ran all the way around the wagons. Again and again and again, ever expanding.
I don't mind this
and
kind.
Algai de Siswai were pushing past her, buffeting through the line of wise ones, running. Savannah beat at them with her spear,
fruity.
flailing at heads and shoulders,
More
not
citrusy.
caring when the spearhead came away redder than before. "Stand and fight! Stand for the honor of the Shire!" They rushed by, unheeding. "Have you no honor? Stand and fight!"
I like this one,
She stabbed a fleeing maiden in
but
the
I
back,
also like
but the
Shatter.
rest just trampled over the
And-
fallen woman. Abruptly, she realized that some
I
of the
mainly
wise
like
ones
Shatter
were gone,
because
and others picking up the injured.
I like
Rihanna
adding
turned
the
to
wax
run,
and shit, like
and Savannah
to a
seized
bowl,
the taller
to a
woman's arm,
joint.
threatening her with the spear. She did not
And
care
with Shatter,
what Rihanna could channel.
it's a lot
"We
easier
must stand. We can still have
putting
him."
that in a joint or
The
a
other
blunt
woman's
than it
face was
is
a mask of
say
fear.
the batter.
"If we stand, we
Because the
die,
Shatter,
or else we end
as long as
chained
you work it
outside
quickly
Randall Thor's
enough,
tent.
you can
Stay
roll
and die
out
if you wish, Savannah. I am no
a
stone
nice
dog."
little
Ripping her
worm
arm
is what we
free,
call
she
'em.
sped eastward.
Just rolled it out.
For a moment more,
Long ways
Savannah
there.
stood there,
When you have
letting
your
the
joint
men and
rolled,
maidens push her this way and that as they
Excuse me.
streamed by and
loaded halfway,
then
like
she tossed
what
down
you
the
would-
spear and felt her belt pouch.
if you go roll
for
a
a small
fatty,
cube
load
of
halfway,
intricately carved stone lay.
put that
Well that she had
that worm
hesitated over
will
throwing that
shatter
away.
in the center of
She had
it.
another cord for her bow yet.
Fill up the rest of the
Gathering
way.
her skirts
Roll
to
it
bare her
up.
legs, she
And
joined
then you
in
got
the
a
chaotic
nice
flight. But if all the rest fled
wax
in
infused
terror,
joint
she
that'll
ran
burn for a
with
minute
plans whirling through her
and
head. She
get
would
you
have
pretty good.
Randall Thor on his knees before her, and the Aes Sedai as well.
Yeah, diamonds ain't too bad.
Alviara
I don't like the
finally
price
left
that you
Elida's
have to pay for
apartments
diamonds.
as cool and collected as ever on the surface. Inside, she felt wrung out like a damp cloth. She managed to keep her legs steady down the long, curving flights of stairs, marble even in the very heights. Liveried servants bowed and curtsied as they scurried about their tasks, seeing only the glitter of Aes Sedai serenity. As she went lower, sisters began to appear, many wearing their shawls, fringed in the colors of their adjas, as if to emphasize by formality that they were full sisters. They eyed her as she passed, uneasy often as not. The only one to ignore her was Danella, a dreamy brown sister. She had been part of bringing down Swan Sanche and raising Elida, but lost in her own thoughts. A solitary with no friends, even in her own Adja, she seemed unaware that she had been shoved aside. Others were all too aware. Barisha, a lean and hard-eyed gray, and Kara, with the fair hair and blue eyes that appeared occasionally among Tyrans, and all the arrogance so common to Greens, went so far as to curtsy. Noreen made as if to, then did not. Big-eyed and nearly as dreamy as Danella at times, and as friendly, she resented Alviarin. If the keeper came from the White, in her eyes it should have been Noreen Dovarna. The courtesy was not required toward the people, not from a sister, but no doubt they hoped she might intercede with Elida should that become necessary. The others merely wondered what commands she carried, whether another sister was to be singled out today for some failure in the Amerlin's eyes. Not even Reds went within 5 levels of the Amerlin's new apartments unless summoned, and more than one sister actually hid when Elida came below. The very air seemed heated, thick with a fear that had nothing to do with rebels or men channeling. Several sisters tried to speak, but Alviarin brushed past, barely polite, hardly noticing worry bloom in their eyes when she refused to pause. Elida filled her mind as much as theirs. A woman of many layers, Elida. The first look at her showed a beautiful woman filled with dignified reserve. The second, a woman of steel, stern as a bared blade. She overwhelmed where others persuaded, bludgeoned where others tried diplomacy or the game of houses. Anyone who knew her saw her intelligence, but only after a time did you realize that for all her brains, she saw what she wanted to see, would try to make true what she wanted to be true. Of the two indisputably frightening things about her, the lesser was that she so often succeeded. The greater was her talent for foretelling. So easy to forget that, erratic and infrequent. It had been so long since the last foretelling that the very unpredictability made it strike like a thunderbolt. No one could say when it would come, not even Elida, and no one could say what it would reveal. Now Alviarin almost felt the woman's shadowy presence following and watching. It might be necessary to kill her yet. If so, Elida would not be the first she'd killed in secret. Still, she hesitated to take that step without orders, or at least permission. She entered her own apartments with a sense of relief, as though Elida's shade could not cross the threshold. A foolish thought. If Elida had a suspicion of the truth, 1,000 leagues would not keep her from Alviarin's throat. Elida would expect her to be hard at work, personally penning orders for the Amerlin's signature and seal. But which of those orders were actually to be carried out?
Hey, Fire, how you doing, bro?
Not by Elida, of course, nor by herself. The rooms were smaller than those Elida occupied, though the ceilings reached higher, and a balcony looked over the great square in front of the tower from 100 feet up. Sometimes she went out on the balcony to see Tar Valon spread out before her, the greatest city in the world, filled with countless thousands who were less than pieces on
About
the
to light
standards
one
board.
up again.
The furnishings were Domani, pale striped wood, inlaid with pearl shell and amber, bright carpets in patterns of flowers and scrolls, brighter tapestries of forest and
Hell yeah,
flowers
Benny.
and grazing deer. They had belonged to the last occupant of these rooms, and if she retained them for any reason beyond not wanting to waste time choosing new, it was to remind herself of the price of failure. Liana Sharif had dabbled in schemes and failed, and now she was cut off from the one power forever, a helpless refugee dependent on charity, doomed to a life of misery, until she either ended it or simply put her face to the wall and died. Alviarin had heard of a few stilled women who managed to survive, but she was not those stories until she met one. Not that she had the slightest desire to do so. Through the windows she could see the brightness of early afternoon, yet before she was halfway across her sitting room, the light suddenly faded into dim evening. The darkness did not surprise her. She turned and went to her knees immediately. Great mistress, I live to serve. A tall woman of dark shadow and silver light stood before her. Messana. Tell me what happened, child. The voice was crystal chimes. On her knees, Alviarin repeated every word that Elida had said, though she wondered why it was necessary. In the beginning, she had left out unimportant bits, and Messana knew every time, demanded every word, every gesture and facial expression. Plainly, she eavesdropped on those meetings. Alviarin had tried to work out the logic of it and failed. Some things did work to logic, though. She had met others of the Chosen, whom the fools called the Forsaken. Lanfear had come within the tower, and Grendal, imperious in their strength and knowledge, making it clear without words that Alviarin was far beneath them, a scullery maid to run errands and wriggle with pleasure if she received a kind word. Belal had snatched Alviarin away in the night while she slept. To where, she still did not know. She had awakened back in her own bed, and that had terrified her even more than being in the presence of a man who could channel. To him she was not even a worm, not even a living thing, just a piece in a game to move at his command. First had been Ishamael, years before the others, plucking her out of the hidden mass of the Black Aja to place her at its head. To each she had knelt, saying that she lived to serve, and meaning it, obeying as they commanded, whatever the command. After all, they stood only a step below the great lord of the dark himself, and if she wanted the rewards of her service, the immortality it seemed they already possessed, it was well to obey. To each she knelt, and only Messana had appeared with an inhuman face. This cloak of shadow and light must be woven with the one power. Alviarin could see no weave. She had felt the strength of Lanfear and Grendal, had known from the first instant how much stronger in the power they were than she, but in Messana she sensed nothing, as if the woman could not channel at all. The logic was clear and stunning. Messana hid herself because she might be recognized. She must reside in the tower itself. On the face of it, that seemed impossible, yet nothing else fit. Given that, she must be one of the sisters. Surely she was not among servants, bound to labor and sweat. But who? Too many women had been out
No,
of the
I'm
tower
actually
for years before
smoking on
Elida's
some,
coming. Too many had no close friends, or none at all. Messana must be one of
passion
those.
fruit.
Alviarin very much wanted to know. Even if she could make no use of it, knowledge was power. So our Elida has had a foretelling, Messana chimed, and Alviarin realized with a start that she had reached the end of her recital. Her mind raced, but she knew better than to rise without permission. A finger of shadow tapped silver lips thoughtfully.
Excuse me.
Had she seen any sister make that gesture? Strange that she should be so clear and so erratic at the same time. It was always a rare talent, and most who had it spoke so only poets could understand.
Oh, you're smoking
Usually until
Acapulco.
it was
Oh,
too late
nice.
to matter, at least. Everything always became clear then. Alviarin kept
That'd
silent.
definitely be a good
None
one
of
to
the
get a
chosen
hold of.
conversed.
To
They
smoke or to
commanded
grow.
demanded. Interesting predictions. The rebels breaking like a rotten melon, was that part of it? I'm not certain, great mistress, she said slowly. Had it been? But Messana only shrugged. Either it is, or it is not, and either way can be used. She is dangerous, great mistress. Her talent could reveal what should not be revealed. Crystalline laughter answered her. Such as? You? Your black sister? Or perhaps you think to safeguard me? You are a good girl sometimes, child. That silvery voice was amused. Alviarin felt her face heat, and hoped that Messana read the shame, not the anger. Do you suggest that our Elida should be disposed of, child? Not yet, I think. She has her uses still, at least until young Alfour reaches us, and very likely after. Follow her orders and see to them. Watching her play her little games is certainly amusing. You children almost match the Aja at times. Will she succeed in having the king of Ilion and the queen of Saldeia kidnapped? You Aes Sedai used to do that, didn't you? But not for, what, 2,000 years? Who will she try to put on the throne of
Relate it
Tyrion?
again.
Will the offer of being king in Tyr overcome the High Lord Darlin's dislike of Aes Sedai? Will our Elida choke on her own frustration first? What pity she resists the idea of a larger army. I'd have thought her ambitions would leap at that. The interview was coming to a close. They never lasted longer than for Alviarin to report and be given her own orders, but she had a question yet to ask. The Black Tower, great mistress. Alviarin wet her lips. She had learned much since Ishamael appeared to her, not least that the Chosen were neither omnipotent nor all-knowing. Reason because Ishamael killed her predecessor in his wrath at discovering what Jarna Malari had begun. Yet it had not ended for another 2 years, after the death of another Amyrlin. She often wondered whether Elida had had any hand in the death of that one, Sirin Vayu. Certainly the Black Aja had not. Jarna had had Tamra Ospenya, the Amyrlin before Sirin, squeezed like a bunch of grapes, obtaining little juice as it turned out, and made her appear to have died in her sleep. But Alviarin and the other 12 sisters of the Great Council had paid in pain before they could convince Ishamael they had no responsibility for it. The Chosen were not all powerful, and they did not know everything. Yet sometimes they knew what no one else did. Asking could be dangerous, though. Why was the most dangerous? The Chosen never liked to be asked why. Is it safe to send 50 sisters to deal with them, great mistress? Eyes glowing like twin full moons regarded her in silence, and a chill slid up Alviarin's spine. Jarna's fate flashed into her mind. Publicly gray, Jarna had never shown any interest in the ter'angreal no one knew a use for, until the day she became snared in one untried for centuries. How to activate it remained a mystery still. For 10 days no one could reach her, only listen to her throat-wrenching shrieks. Most of the tower thought Jarna a model of virtue. When what could be recovered was buried, every sister in Tar Valon and everyone who could reach the city in time. You have curiosity, child, Messana said finally. That can be an asset, properly directed. Wrongly directed. The threat hung in the air like a gleaming dagger. I will direct it as you command, great mistress, Alviarin breathed hoarsely. Her mouth was dry as dust. Only as you command. But she would still see that no black sisters went with Tovann. Messana moved, looming over her so she had to crane her neck to look up at that face of light and shadow, and suddenly she wondered whether the Chosen knew her thoughts. If you would serve me, child, then you must serve and obey me. Not Semirhage or Demongred, not Graendal or anyone else, only me. And the Great Lord, of course, but me. I live to serve you, great mistress. That came out in a croak, but she managed to emphasize the added word. For a long moment, silvery eyes stared down at her, unblinking. Then Messana said, Good. I will teach you then. But remember that a pupil is not a teacher. I choose who learns what, and I decide when they can make use of it. Should I find you have passed on the smallest scrap, or used even a hair of it without my direction, I will extinguish you. Alviarin worked moisture back into her mouth. There was no anger in those chimes, only certainty. I live to serve you, great mistress. I live to obey you, great mistress. She had just learned
Hell yeah,
something
Benny.
about the chosen that she could hardly credit. Knowledge was power.
That means you could be sleeping good tonight.
Not much, but enough. A wheeze appeared seemingly from nowhere. This, Messana chimed, is called a gateway.
Pedro Nile grunted as Morghese placed a white stone on the board with a smile of triumph. Lesser players might set 24 more stones each yet, but he could see the inevitable course now, and so could she. In the beginning, the golden-haired woman seated on the other side of the small table had played to lose,
Yeah, shit.
to make the game close enough to be interesting.
As some
for him.
people do.
But it had not taken her long to learn that led to obliteration. Not to mention that he was clever enough to see through the subterfuge and would not tolerate it. Now she plied all her skill and managed to win nearly half their games. No one had beaten him so often in a good many years. The game is yours, he told her, and the Queen of Andor nodded. Well, she would be queen again. He would see to that. In green silk, with a high lace collar brushing her chin, she looked every inch.
Oh yeah, 'cause it's more of a
perspiration on her smooth cheeks. She hardly appeared old
A
enough
body.
to her Elaine's age, though, much less her son Gawain's. You did not realize I saw the trap you were laying from your 31st stone, Lord Nile. And you took my feint from the 43rd stone to be my real attack. Excitement sparkled in her blue eyes. Morghese liked to win. She liked playing to win. It was all meant to lull him, of course, the playing at stones, the politeness. Morghese knew she was a prisoner in the Fortress of the Light in all but name, albeit a luxuriously pampered prisoner, and a secret one. He had allowed stories of her presence to spread, but issued no proclamations. Andor had too strong a history of opposing the Children of the Light. He would announce nothing until legions moved into Andor, with her their figurehead. Morghese certainly knew that as well. Very probably, she also knew he was aware of her attempts to soften him.
Huh.
The treaty she had
That'd be a
signed gave the
trip.
children rights in Andor they had never
Eat an
possessed
edible and
anywhere,
I start tripping.
except in Amadicia. And he expected that she already planned how to lighten his hand on her land, how to remove his hand altogether as soon as she could. She had only signed because he backed her into a corner. Yet confined in that corner, she fought on as skillfully as she maneuvered on a stone's board. For one so beautiful, she was a tough woman. No, she was tough, and that was that. She did let herself be caught up in the pure pleasure of the game, but he could not count that a fault when it gave him so many pleasant moments. Had he been even 20 years younger, he might have played more to her true game. Long years as a widower stretched behind him, and the Lord Captain Commander of the Children of the Light had little time for pleasantries with women, little time for anything except being Lord Captain Commander. Had he been 20 years younger, well, 25, and she not trained by the Tarvalin witches. It was easy to forget that, in her presence. The White Tower was a sink of iniquity and the shadow, and she touched deeply by it. Radha Masanawa, the High Inquisitor, would have tried her for her months in the White Tower and hanged her without delay, had Nile allowed it. He sighed regretfully. Morghese kept her victorious smile, but those big eyes studied his face with an intelligence she could not hide. He filled her goblet, and his own, with wine from the silver pitcher sitting in a bowl of cool water that had been ice a little while ago. My lord Nile. The hesitation was just right. The slim hand half stretched across the table toward him, the added respect in how she addressed him. Once she had called him simply Niall, with more contempt than she would have handed a drunken groom. The hesitation would have been just right had he not had the measure of her. My lord Niall, surely you can order Galad to Amador so I may see him? Just for a day. I regret, he replied smoothly, that Galad's duties keep him in the north. You should be proud. He is one of the best young officers among the children. Her stepson was a lever to use on her at need, one best used now by keeping him away. The young man was a good officer, perhaps the best to join the children in Niall's time. And there was no need to put strains on his oath by letting him know his mother was here, and a guest only by courtesy. No more than a slight tightening of her mouth, quickly gone, betrayed her disappointment. This was not the first time.
Oh, yeah, I
she had
forgot
made
it goes
request,
back, don't it?
nor the last. Morgay Strachan did not surrender just because it was plain she defeated him. As you say, my lord Niall, she said so meekly that he nearly choked on his wine. Submissiveness was a new tactic, one she must have worked up with difficulty. It is just a mother's... My lord Captain Commander, a deep, resonant voice broke in from the doorway. I fear I have important news that cannot wait, my lord. Abdul Omerna stood tall in the white and gold tabard of a lord captain of the Children of the Light, bold face framed by wings of white at his temples, dark eyes deep and thoughtful. From head to toe he was fearless and commanding, and a fool, though that was not apparent at a glance. Morgay drew in on herself at the sight of Omerna, so small a motion most men would not have noticed. She believed him spy master for the children, as everyone did. A man to be feared almost as much as Asunawa, perhaps more. Even Omerna himself did not know he was but a decoy to keep eyes away from the true master of spies, a man known only to Niall himself. Seban Balwer, Niall's dry little stick of a secretary. Yet, decoy or not, something useful did pass through Omerna's hands on occasion. On rare occasions, something dire. Niall had no doubts what the man had brought. Nothing else except Randolph Thor at the gates would have sent him barging in this way. The Light's End, it was all a rug merchant's madness. Gaming is done this morning, Niall told Morgay sadly. He offered her a slight bow as she rose. Until this evening, perhaps? Her voice still had on the doctor tone. That is, if you will dine with me. Niall accepted, of course. He did not know where she was leading with this, not where an oath might suppose, he was sure, but it would be amusing to find out. The woman was full of surprises. Such a pity she was trained by the witches. Omerna advanced as far as the great sun flare of gold set in the floor that had been worn by beaten knees over centuries. It was a plain room aside from that, and the captured banners that lined the walls high beneath the ceiling, age-tattered and worn. Omerna watched her skirt around him without really acknowledging his presence. When the door closed behind her, he said, I have not yet found Elaine or Gawain, my lord. Is that your important news? Niall demanded irritably. Balwer reported Morgay's daughter and Ebu Dar, still mired to her neck with the witches. Orders concerning her had already been sent to Jacob Karadin. Her other son still toiled with the witches as well, it seemed, in Tarvalin, where even Balwer possessed few eyes and ears. Niall took a long swallow of cool wine. His bones felt old and brittle and cold of late. Yet the shadow-spawned heat made his skin sweat enough and dried his mouth. Omerna gave a start. No, my lord. He fumbled in a pocket of his white undercoat and pulled out a tiny bone cylinder with 3 red stripes running its length. We wanted this brought as soon as the pigeon arrived in the... He cut off as Niall snatched the tube. This was what he had been waiting for. The reason a legion was not already on its way to Andor, with Morgay's riding at its head, if not... If it was not all Baradin's madness, the ravings of a man unbalanced by watching Taraban collapse into anarchy, Andor would have to wait. Andor, and maybe more. I have confirmation that the White Tower truly has broken, Omerta went on. The Black Aja has seen... No wonder he sounded nervous, speaking hers. There was no Black Aja. All of the witches were dark friends. Niall ignored him and broke the wax sealing the cube with his thumbnail. He had used Bulwer to start those rumors, and now they came back to him. Omerta believed every rumor his ears caught, and his ears caught them all. And there are reports that the witches are conferring with the false dragon Althor, my lord.
Hell yeah, Bean. Definitely appreciate it, bro.
The witches were conferring with him. He was their creation, their puppet. Now, shut up the fool's blather and move back.
I'm nice and mellow till someone pushes me to that point, then.
He never let
Something
anyone know more of
completely
these
different.
messages than that they existed. Few knew that much. His hands trembled as they unrolled the thin paper. His hands had not trembled since he was a boy facing his first battle, more than 70 years ago. Those hands seemed little more than bone and sinew now, but they still possessed enough strength for what he had to do. The writing was not that of Baradin, but of Phasar, sent to Tarvin for a different purpose. Niall's stomach twisted into a knot as he read. It was in clear language, not Baradin's cipher. Baradin's reports had been the work of a man on the brink of madness, if not over. Yet Phasar confirmed the worst of it and more, much more. Althor was a rabid beast, a destroyer who must be stopped. But now a second mad animal had appeared, one that might be even more dangerous than the Tabalan witches with their tame false dragon. How under the light could he fight both? It seems that Queen Tenobia has left Saldaria, my lord. And the dragon swarm are burning and killing across Altara and Muridi. I have heard the Horn of Valir has been found, in Kandor. Still half distracted, Niall looked up to find Omerta at his side, licking his lips and wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. No doubt he hoped for a glance at what was in the message. Well, everyone would know soon enough. It seems one of your wilder fancies wasn't so wild after all, Niall said. And that was when he felt the knife go in under his ribs. Shock froze him long enough for Omerta to pull the dagger free and plunge it in again. Other Lord Captain Commanders had died this way before him, yet he had never thought it would be Omerta. He tried to grapple with his killer, but there was no force in his arms. He hung on to Omerta with the man supporting him, the pair of them eye to eye. Omerta's face was red. He looked ready to weep. It had to be done. It had to be. You let the witches sit there in Solidar, unhindered, and... As if suddenly realizing that he had his eyes locked on he was murdering, he pushed Niall away. Strength had gone from Niall's legs now, as well as his arms. He fell heavily against the gaming table, turning it over. Black and white stones scattered across the polished wooden floor around him. The silver pitcher bounced and splashed water. The cold in his bones was leaching out into the rest of him. He was not certain whether time had slowed for him, or everything really did happen so quickly. Boots thudded across the floor, and he lifted his head wearily to see Omerta gaping and wide-eyed, backing away from Eamon Valda. Every bit as much the picture of a Lord Captain as Omerta in his white and gold tabard and white undercoat, Valda was not so tall, not so plainly commanding, but the dark man's face was hard, as ever, and he had a sword in his hands, the heron-marked blade he brought. Treason! Valda bellowed, and drove the sword through Omerta's chest. Niall would have laughed if he could. Breath came hard. He could hear it bubbling in the blood in his throat. He had never liked Valda. In fact, he despised the man, but someone had to know. His eyes shifted from the slip of paper from Tanchico, lying not far from his hand. It might be missed there, but not if his corpse clutched it.
Yeah.
And that message had to be read. His hand seemed to
Nice,
crawl across
Billy.
the floorboards so slowly.
I try to be.
Pushing at it as he fumbled to take hold. His vision was growing misty. He tried to force himself to see. He had to. The fog was thicker. Part of him tried to shake that thought. There was no fog. The fog was thicker, and there was an enemy out there, unseen, hidden, as dangerous as Althor or more. The message. What message? It was time to mount and outsword. Time for one last attack. By the light, win or die, he was coming. He tried to snarl. Balder wiped his blade on Amyrna's tabard and suddenly realized the old wolf still breathed. A rasping, bubbling sound. Grimacing, he bent to make an end. A gaunt, long-fingered hand caught his arm. Would you be Lord Captain Commander now, my son? Asanawa's emaciated face belonged on a martyr, yet his dark eyes burned with a fervor to unnerve even those who did not know who he was. You may well be, after I attest that you killed Adrian Niles' assassin, but not if I must say that you ripped open Niles' throat as well. Baring teeth in what could pass for a smile, straight. Asanawa had a love of truth, a strange love. He could tie it into knots, or hang it up and flay it while it screamed, but so far as Valda knew, he never actually lied. A look at Niles' glazed eyes and the pool of blood spreading beneath him satisfied Valda. The old man was dying. Me, Asanawa? The High Inquisitor's gaze burned hotter as Asanawa stepped back, moving the snowy cloak away from Niles' blood. Even a Lord Captain was not supposed to be that familiar. I said nay, my son. You have been oddly reluctant to agree that the witch Morghese must be given to the hand of the light. Unless you give that assurance, Morghese is needed yet. This gave Balder considerable pleasure. He did not like questioners. The hand of the light, as they called it. Who could like men who never met an enemy not disarmed and in chains? They held themselves apart from the children, separate. Asanawa's cloak bore only the scarlet shepherd's crook of the questioners, not the flaring golden sun of the children that graced his own tabard. Worse, they seemed to think their work with racks and hot irons was the only true work of the children. Morghese gives us Andor, so you cannot have her before we have it. And we cannot take Andor until the Prophet's mobs are crushed. The Prophet had to be first, preaching the coming of the Dragon Reborn, his mobs burning villages too slow to proclaim for Althor. Niles' chest barely moved now. Unless you want to trade Amadisia for Andor instead of holding both. I mean to see Althor hung and the White Tower ground to dust. And I did not go along with your plan just to see you toss it all on the midden. Asanawa was not taken aback. He was no coward. Not here, with hundreds of questioners in the fortress and most of the children wary of putting a foot wrong around them. He ignored the sword in Balda's hands, and that martyr's face took on a look of sadness. His sweat seemed to be tears of regret. In that case, since Lord Captain Convila believes that the law must be obeyed, I fear Convila agrees with me. I fear Convila agrees with me, Asanawa. Since dawn, he did, since he realized that Valda had brought half a legion into the fortress. Convila was no fool. The question is not whether I will be Lord Captain Commander when the sun sets today, but who will guide the hand of the light in its digging for truth. No coward, Asanawa, and even less a fool than Convila. He neither flinched nor demanded how Valda thought to bring this about. I see, he said after a moment, and then mildly, do you mean to flout the law entirely, my son? Valda almost laughed. You can examine Morgaze, but she is not to be put to the question. You can have her for that when I am done with her. Which might take a little time. Finding a replacement for the Lion Throne, one who understood her proper relationship to the children, as King Ioron did here, would not happen overnight. Perhaps Asunawa understood, and perhaps not. He opened his mouth, and there was a gasp from the doorway. Niall's pinch-faced secretary stood there, purse-mouthed and knobby, narrow eyes trying to stare at everything except the bodies stretched out on the floor. "A sad day, Master Balwer," Asunawa intoned, his voice sorrowful iron. "The traitor Omerna has slain our Lord Captain Commander Pedron Niall. The light illumined his soul." Not an advance on the truth. Niall's chest no longer moved, and killing him had been treason. Lord Captain Valda entered too late to save him, but he did slay Omerna in the full depth of his sin. Bulwer gave a start and began dry-washing his hands. The bird-like fellow made Valda itch. "Since you are here, Bulwer, you may as well be useful." He disliked useless people, and the scribbler was the very form of uselessness. "Carry this message to each Lord Captain in the fortress. Tell them the Lord Captain Commander has been murdered, and I call for a meeting of the Council of the Anointed." His first act on being named Lord Captain Commander would be to boot the dried-up little man out of the fortress, boot him so far he bounced twice, and choose a secretary who did not twitch. Omerna was bought by the witches or the prophet. I mean to see Pedron Niall avenged. "As you say, my lord." Bulwer's voice was dry and narrow. "It shall be as you say." He apparently found himself able to look on Niall's body at last. As he bowed himself out jerkily, he hardly looked at anything else. "So it seems you will be our next Lord Captain Commander after all," Asunawa said once Bulwer was gone. "So it seems," Valda answered dryly. A tiny slip of paper lay next to Niall's outstretched hand, the sort used in sending messages by pigeon. Valda bent and picked it up, then exhaled in disgust. The paper had been sitting in a puddle of wine. Whatever had been written on it was lost, the ink a blur. "And the hand will have Morgaze when your need for her is done." That was not in the slightest a question. "I will hand her to you myself." Perhaps a little something might be arranged to sate Asunawa's appetite.
I have my bad days sometimes, but that's why I mainly stay
on Niall's corpse.
in my house.
The old wolf had lost
I don't
his
like
cunning
going
and his
outside.
nerve with age. Now it would be up to Eamon
Makes
Valda
me a better
to bring
person
the
not to have to
witches
deal with other people.
and their false dragon to heal. Flat on his belly on a rise, Gawain surveyed disaster beneath the afternoon sun. Demise Wells lay miles to the south now, across rolling plain and low hills, but he could still see the smoke from burning wagons. What had happened there, after he led what he could gather of the younglings in breaking out, he did not know. Althor had seemed well in charge, Althor and those black-coated men who appeared to be channeling, taking down Aes Sedai and Aiel alike. It had been the realization that sisters were fleeing that told him it was time to go. He wished he could have killed Althor. For his mother, dead by the man's doing. Egwene denied it, but she had no proof. For his sister, if Min had spoken the truth, he should have made her leave the camp with him, whatever she wanted. There was too much he should have done differently today. If Min was right, and Elaine loved Althor, then that dreadful fate was reason enough to kill. Maybe the Aiel had done the work for him. He doubted it, though. With a sour laugh, he raised the tube of his looking glass. One of the golden bands bore an inscription, "From Morgaze, Queen of Andor, to her beloved son Gawain. May he be a living sword for his sister and Andor." Bitter words now. There was not much to see beyond sere grass and small scattered clumps of trees. The wind still gusted, raising waves of dust. Occasionally a flash of movement in a crease between squat ridges spoke of men on the move. Aiel, he was sure. They blended with the land too well to be green-coated younglings. The light send that more had escaped than those he had brought out. He was a fool. He should have killed Althor. He had to kill him.
I work on being a
But
better
he did
person
not.
every day still.
Not because the man was
It's
the
a,
dragon
it's a
reborn,
never-ending
because
job.
He had promised
Sometimes it seems like.
not to raise a hand against Althor. As a lowly accepted, she had vanished from Carrion, leaving Gawain only a letter that he had read
That's
and
what it
reread until
was.
the paper was ready to tear along the folds. And he would not be surprised to learn she had gone to aid Althor in some way. He could not break his word, least of all to the woman he loved. Never his word to her, whatever the cost to himself. He hoped she would accept the compromise he had made with his honor. He had raised not a hand to harm, but none to help either. The light send she never asked that of him.
Let's
It was said
Let's
that
finish
love
the prologue
handled men's
first.
brains, and he was the
then I'll.
Suddenly he pressed the looking glass to his eye as a woman galloped a tall black horse into the open. He could not make out her face, but no servant would be wearing a dress divided for riding. So at least one Aes Sedai had managed to escape. If sisters had made it out of the trap alive, maybe more of the younglings had too. With luck, he could find them before they were killed in small groups by the Aiel. First, there was the matter of this sister, though. In many ways, he would rather have gone on without her, but leaving her alone, maybe to take an arrow she never saw coming, was not an option he could allow himself. As he started to rise and wave to her, though, the horse stumbled and fell, pitching her over its head. He cursed. Then again, when the looking glass showed him an arrow, he relaxed aside. Hastily he scanned the hills and bit down on another curse. Maybe 24 veiled Aiel stood on a crest staring toward downed horse and rider, less than 100 paces from the Aes Sedai. Quickly he glanced back. The sister rose unsteadily to her feet. If she kept her wits and used the power, there should be no way a few Aiel could harm her, especially if she took shelter against more arrows behind the fallen horse. Even so, he would feel better when he had gathered her in. Rolling away from the crest to lessen the chances of the Aiel, he slid down the reverse slope until he could stop. He had brought 581 younglings south, everyone who was far enough along in training, but fewer than 200 waited down their horses in the hollow. Before disaster struck at Dumai's Wells, he was certain there had been a plot afoot to see that he and the younglings died without returning to the White Tower. Why, he did not know, nor whether the scheme came from Elida or Galena. But it had succeeded well enough, exactly in the way its devisers had thought. Small wonder that he would have preferred to go on without Aes Sedai, had he any
Hell yeah,
choice.
cheers, fire.
He stopped beside
Hope
a
you're
tall
doing
gray
well,
gelding with
brother.
a young rider.
Hope everyone's
Young,
doing
as
well
indeed
tonight.
all the younglings were. Many
And
did
had
not
a
need
safe
to check
weekend.
beyond every third
Well,
day.
it's still the
Potentially
weekend,
even
but
that. But Jasao wore the silver tower on his collar, marking him a veteran of the fighting when Swan Sanche was deposed, and scars beneath his clothes from fighting since. He was one of those who could skip the razor most
hell
mornings.
yeah, fire.
His dark eyes belonged to a man 30 years older, though. What did his own eyes look like, Gawain wondered.
Because staying busy means you're staying out of
Jasao.
trouble.
We have a sister to pull out of the 100 or so Aiel who came trotting over the low rise to the west recoiled in surprise at finding the younglings below, but neither surprise nor the younglings'
Hell yeah.
superior numbers
Fire.
held them back. You know, they sailed and plunged down the slope, darting in with spears, stabbing at horses as often as riders, working in pairs. Yet if the Aiel knew how to fight men on horseback, the younglings had recently had rough lessons in how to fight Aiel, and slow learners do not live long in their ranks. Some carried slender lances, ending in 1.5 feet of steel with a crossguard to prevent the head penetrating too deeply. And all could use their swords as well as any but a blade master. They fought in 2s and 3s, each man watching another's back, keeping their mounts moving so the Aiel could not hamstring
No
the
shit.
animals. Only the quickest Aiel managed to get inside
For us,
those
I think,
circles
let's
of
see
flashing
what we
steel.
could be at.
The war-trained horses themselves were weapons, splitting skulls with their hooves, seizing men with their teeth, and shaking them like dogs worrying rats, jaws tearing away half a man's face. The horses screamed as they fought, shouted with the fever that overtook men in
They're
battle,
supposed to have a
fever that said they were
high of
alive
79
and to see another
today,
sunrise if they
and
had to
tomorrow's
wait
supposed to be.
blood.
Well, tomorrow
shouted
is
as
in
they
Monday.
Shouted as they
We're
died.
supposed to be
There seemed little difference.
90 degrees.
Gowan had no time to watch or listen.
Thursday we
The only
cool
youngling
down.
afoot, he attracted attention.
Thursday and Friday we
Three
get down
mounted
to
sword-clad
63
figures
and
dodged through the
57.
horsemen, rushing at him with spears ready.
Pretty much
Perhaps they thought him easy meat.
90 to
He
mid
disabused
to
them.
low 80s for the rest
His
of the
sword
week.
left the scabbard smoothly
At
as
least
it
all the way
flowed
up
from the
until
falcon
Thursday.
stoops to the creeper embraces the oak to the moon rises over the lakes. 3 times he felt
But
the
that's
shock
pretty
in his
much,
wrists of blade meeting flesh.
I guess the start of
That
our
quickly,
winter.
3 veiled Aielmen were down. 2 still moving weakly, but they were out of the fight as much as the other. The next to confront him was a different matter. A lean
I
fellow,
wish we would get a
overtopping
good winter
Gowan by a
here.
hand, he moved like a snake, spear flickering while his buckler darted and slanted to deflect sword strokes with a force Gowan could feel to his shoulders. The wood grouse
Oh
dancers
shit, that's
became
crazy.
folding the air, became the courier taps his fan, and the Aielman met each of them at the cost of a slash along his ribs.
Oh shit,
While
14
Gowan took a
Fahrenheit.
gash on his thigh that
Oh,
only
shit.
a quick twist kept from being a stab clean through.
That's pretty cold.
They circled one another, oblivious to whatever happened around them. Blood oozed
I
hot
think
down Gowan's leg.
last year for our
The
winter,
Aielman fainted, hoping to draw
I
him
think
off
we actually
balance.
got down
Fainted again.
to
Gowan shifted from stance to stance.
about that
Sword
that
now
cold.
high, now low, hoping the man
For a
would
little
extend
bit.
one of those half thrusts just a little too
But
far.
actually not that cold. I think we got down
In
to
the
like
end, it was chance that decided
the
matters.
mid 20s.
The Aielman abruptly stumbled a step, and Gowan ran him through the heart before he even saw the
Oh,
horse
shit.
that had backed his man.
That
Once he
sounds
would have
like
felt
our
regret.
snow.
He had
We'll
grown
get
up believing
snow
that
one
if 2
night
men must
and
fight,
be dumping
that yours should
like
proceed
snow.
honorably and cleanly.
Thinking it's gonna
More
be
than half a year of battles and skirmishes had
be
taught
there
him
for a
better.
little bit,
He put a foot on the Aielman's
look
chest,
nice and all
wrenched his
whatnot,
foot
but
free.
it was
Ungallant
about
but fast.
by noon the next
Battle,
day.
slow, was often dead.
Most of it, if not all of it, was
Only
already
when
gone.
his sword was free, there was no need for speed. Men were down, younglings and Aielmen, some groaning, some still. And the rest of the Aiel streaming away to the east, carried by 24 younglings, including some who should know better. "Hold!" he shouted. If the idiots allowed themselves to become separated, the Aiel would cut them to dog meat. "No pursuit! Hold, I said! Hold, burn you!" The younglings pulled up reluctantly. Jisao reined his gelding around. "They just thought to cut a path through us on the way wherever they're going, my lord." His sword dripped red from half its length. Gowan caught the reins of his own bay stallion and swung his sword, not waiting to clean or sheathe his blade. No time to see who was dead, who might live. "Forget them. That sister is waiting for us. I'll keep your half-troop to look after the wounded. And watch those Aiel. Just because they're dying doesn't mean they have quit. The rest, follow me." Hal saluted with his sword, but Gowan was already digging in his spurs. The skirmish had not lasted long, yet too long, however short. When Gowan reached the crest, only the dead horse was to be seen, its saddlebags turned out. Scanning through his looking glass revealed not a sign of the sister, the Aiel, or anything else living. All that moved was wind-blown dust and a dress on the ground near the horse, stirring in the gusts. The woman must have sprinted to be so completely out of sight so quickly. "She can't have gone far, even running," Jisao said. "We can find her if we fan out. We'll search after we see
Yeah,
the
that'd be
Gowan
one way
replied
to
firmly.
try
He
to
was not about
quit.
split up his men
If
with
you're
Aiel
trying to
over
quit,
the-
is
Only a few
when
hours
it's cold
yet
as
till
shit
sunset.
outside. That's
He
when you
wanted to
smoke.
tighten camp on
Because
high ground before then.
I'm
It
not
might
gonna
be
be
as
wanting
well
to be
as he did
outside
manage to
trying
find
to
a sister or
smoke.
two.
It was cold as
Someone was
hell.
going to have to explain this catastrophe to Elida.
Either I'm
And he
gonna
would as soon it was an Aes Sedai facing her
smoke
wrath,
some of this
not him.
cigarette and put it out,
Turning his bay with a sigh,
or
he rode back down to see what the butcher's
Definitely not gonna smoke a full cigarette. It was cold,
That had been his first real
like
lesson as a
really
soldier.
cold.
You always had to pay the butcher.
Go out there,
He had a feeling there would be bigger
get a
bills.
cigarette out of
too
your
soon.
pack, get ready to light it, then
The world would
Say,
forget
"Fuck
Levi's
it,"
Wells.
then go back
and what was
inside.
coming. Chapter 1. Hi, Chazaline.
All right, everyone. All right. I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. Be back on again tomorrow night. But I want to thank Alan for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by, chilling with me. Yeah, definitely good session, Fire. Definitely appreciate all y'all support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.